as hip dysplasia, and dysplasia really just means there's abnormal development of the ball and socket. And the underlying theme for this abnormal development is there happens to be laxity between the ball and the socket. So when a dog is a puppy and they're skeletally immature, what's happening is when they're walking, there's more motion within the ball and socket, and the ball's sort of bouncing around the socket more than it should. And there's this nice layer of cartilage over the ball and on the inside of the socket. And so when it's bouncing around, it's banging up and damaging that cartilage. And over time, once the cartilage is damaged, that will lead to osteoarthritis. And so hip dysplasia doesn't necessarily mean that there's arthritis there. What that means is that there's a condition that could lead to the development of arthritic changes later down the road. And that's what makes it so challenging, because we can have all of these puppies that have abnormal hips that have no clinical signs, and they're bebopping along and life is great. And then they hit adulthood and then they start to have mobility issues. And we think, well, this is the first time we're seeing an issue, and we take an x-ray and there's arthritic changes, and now all of a sudden there's this problem, but that problem didn't just develop. That's sort of the end result of the problem that's been there all along.
Yeah, and I think that's something that really caught me, and people still say, why are you so obsessed with arthritis? And it's getting a bit dull now, hey? Is because it's a disease of the younger dog. It starts with a younger dog. And that, to me, is something we really need to be doing more about. You know, leaving dogs with the potential for a life of pain is something that we need to be tackling head on. Now, don't get me wrong, CAM started more for the grey muzzles because I really felt that not enough was being provided for them.
Sure.
But very soon we realized that the people that almost needed us more were the people that had the young dog diagnosis, and they saw 10 to 12 years ahead of management. And that is consuming. But before we go there, I think we also need to deal with another slight myth, is to be or not to be. You know, I have hip dysplasia or I don't have hip dysplasia. And actually, it's such a spectrum, isn't it? And you can't just say, my dog's got it, because it can be mild, moderate, severe, terrible. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's all along a spectrum where we can have a young dog that's got hip laxity with no clinical signs whatsoever. We can have a dog that's got hip laxity that has some intermittent stiffness and soreness, or maybe they bunny hop or have a nice little model sway walk to them. Or we can have a young dog with hip laxity that's so excruciatingly painful they can't walk. And then we can have dogs that have arthritic changes that have no clinical signs. We can have dogs that have arthritic changes that have intermittent, sometimes clinical signs. And then we can also have dogs that have arthritic changes that have severe clinical signs where it affects their quality of life. And so there's certainly not a black or white line in the sand. And when it comes to hip dysplasia and arthritis as well, it's gray. It's just spread all over the place. And the problem is trying to look at a puppy that has, say, hip laxity and then say, well, in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, here's what we should expect. It's completely a toss-up. You know, every dog is different. Every dog responds to pain differently. And so we have no way to predict the severity and when that's going to occur and how that's going to affect that particular dog. And it's very, very difficult, which is why, you know, even though this disease condition was first characterized in the 1930s, you know, here we are in 2021, and there's still so many unknowns about the disease. You know, we've made a lot of headway, but there's still so much more.
Yeah,